There's the mental on state sanctioned violence that certainly I felt that the Spirit had placed back on my heart um, for Ujima to get under the the weight of remembering kind of what our commitment was and is. Um, and then there's some of what I've been wrestling with about the racial justice work. And they're not the same thing. They're kind of two different things right now, both of which are on my mind and heart. And and I would say around the racial justice work, I feel like I have more questions than answers, um, and I feel like somewhat adrift, wanting to land, um, and just and really wondering whether really struggling because I guess I'm wondering whether it's possible. I want it to be possible for this work to happen and everyone get what they need to get on this journey, but it's feeling like that's happening less and less, right? As yeah, as folks try to find their place, right? And I'm trying to find my place and then trying to understand other people's place too. And just what it means for the meeting, for this work to grow out of something spiritual as opposed to something political or strategic. So right now, some of the strategic thinking is that it's important to create white spaces and organize white people, and because some people think of Quakers as white people, then it's easy for the message to be white people talking to white people in Black people's presence about Black people, right? And so it's like there's no ministry for you. There's no, and it can just render you. It can render one like invisible and marginalized, and can just, you know, it's hard not to get angry. um, yeah. So yeah, they're two different things, and it's hard for me to sort through. So I think that I like to talk a little bit about where I think like I am, and where Ujima is in terms of the state sanctioned violence. And then if there's time to talk a little bit about some of what I'm thinking about this racial justice work, if that's okay.
That's perfect.
Okay. So yes, in 2016, we got this, in 2016, in response to, the death of Philando Castillo and Anton Sterling. There's this, this restlessness amongst friends, period, but just this heavy, crushing weight for many Black friends, and just the sense that, like the Spirit's calling us to do something, right? To bear witness with more than our words, right? And that, yeah, what does it mean for you to really take action based on your calling and based on your faith? And so from that grows this minute on state sanctioned violence, um, and and then from and so there's the minute on state sanctioned violence, and in it, it's a call to action. And there are these 4 actions that we're called to take. And one of them was developing peace centers. And so that got to be the first action. And I think that the reason why it got to be the first action is because establishing a worship community was a part of it. And we knew that all the other things that needed to happen still need to be grounded in something spiritual. It still needs to be grounded in worship. And so since worship was clearly articulated as an activity at the Peace Center. We started with the Peace Center. And then the Peace Center has taken off and has a life of its own. And it's almost like we forgot about those other three actions. And so, with all of the um, upheaval and the rebellion, um, and the resistance to the continuation of this violence, I just felt called to go back to the minute.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing to see what we were calling for in 2016,
Mm-hmm.
right? In terms of a transitioning of police force to a peace force, and saying that a part of the police could be devoted to this this cohort of folks who handled infractions in the community with community members, but not being armed. And maybe it would be wonderful for your first year, that your rookie year, that you weren't armed and you were a part of the Peace Force, and that the Peace Force consisted of police and people in the community, and that they would be trained together
Mm.
by folks that were chosen by the community, as opposed to, well, we're just going to transition this police and we're going to bring in these these anti-bias people, but we're still calling the shots, right? Before folks in the community say, so this is, these are trainers that we trust. And just the sense that, that Quakers could have such um, a I think, a critical role in being able to offer, some form of, alternative to violence training, that was, rooted in something that was culturally synchronistic, and that, Black friends and alternative to violence friends could, come together and actually develop something in community with this other group of folks that were coming together. And so that we really had something to offer, in thinking about, okay, so how can this training happen, in a way that is rooted in the recognition of the divinity and the worth in everybody who was participating in it, right? Um, and this notion of, what most folk think are just radical and almost impossible, of disarmament,
Mm.
and what does it mean to call us all into it, so to be able to say in our communities, let's lay down our weapons, and to say to the police, okay, we know all y'all not gonna lay down your weapons, but like, how about if we have this group of folks, you lay down your weapons and you're joining with folks who have also made a commitment to lay down their weapons, and together we're doing some things together. So the fact that we were looking at a model that involved disarmament, that involved community policing, that was based on a training model um, that had features of alternative to violence, and empatapo, and some other models that would also deal with, bias and race and racism. Um, and so just saying, okay, it's time for us to ask, what are we supposed to be doing now, like, to really get under the weight of these three, and offer them as a place that folks can begin to have a conversation. So, there were friends in yearly meetings and monthly meetings who received the minute, and affirmed the minute. And so if you were part of that group of people, okay, how about returning to the minute, and talking about some of the actions that are there, and let's, test it and see whether these are things that we still feel led to call for, as opposed to even just automatically saying, oh, I belong to the defund the police movement. Okay, but we as friends have said that there's some things that we would like to see happen. And what does that mean to, as people are organizing around police reform, what does that mean to step into that and say, we have some things that we've been thinking about in terms of police reform, and they're not simply things that we're just asking other folk to do. We believe that we can really help with this. Um, and so I'm excited about that. And what the fellowship has done is begun to republish the minute. And there are folks, we've heard from folks in I guess this Western Pacific yearly meeting that's really interested in thinking about next steps. We've even heard from folks who are like, how about if we start more peace centers? And have peace centers popping up in various places that then could partner with the community and partner with the police. And that was from the beginning, it wasn't that there was going to be a peace center. There were going to be peace centers as people felt led to start them, but they would be rooted in worship. And so I'm excited about being under the weight of next steps, even though I'm not sure exactly what those steps are. Besides publishing this to Quakers, we also have committed ourselves to reaching out to people in the community to share, to see how community folk feel and see it, and also reaching out to our politicos, because we know that right now they're working on police reforms. We have a copy of what folks in Philly with the Black elected officials in Philly had come together and put together a series of reform measures. And so our thinking is, let's reach out to folks who are working on it to say, these are some things that we're thinking about, and it's okay if folks, because folks hear disarmament and it's like, oh my God, that's just so pie in the sky. But as friends, we have to be comfortable with taking extraordinary, radical positions, and sometimes the world catches up. And so I'm excited about the prospects of working on these things, and excited about what it means for Black Quakers in particularly to just be actively engaged in this work of transformation, right? So that's that piece. This racial justice work, it's really difficult right now to feel a part of a spiritual community that I continue to feel I continue to feel that some of the direction that we're traveling in is based on a loss of faith, and as opposed to based on our faithfulness. And I just really continue to be confused about what is the standard that, and standard might not be the word I'm looking for, but in trying to figure out what the Spirit is saying to me. Sometimes it's like, okay, so how do you test it, right? And like the old-fashioned Pentecostal test was the fruit of the spirits, and you would think about, well, Is this characterized by, love and long suffering and, joy and peace? And those things don't always characterize what the Spirit is leading us to do. And so really trying to discern, what are we supposed to do right now to move ourselves into right relationship with one another, both as individuals and as a people, right? And what does it mean for us to take action to address systemic racism as opposed to personal, individual? How do we feel better? How do we get people to recognize their bias? And so there seems to be a lot of energy put into how do we get people to recognize their bias? And, a part of that just, for me seems to be, okay, so, who amongst these white people are going to lead these other white people into the promised land? And it's really scary because you say, okay, so it looks like that what Quakers are doing right now is trying to cultivate like an army, for lack of a better word, of white people who are anti-racist, who can lead other white people. And for me, it's like, white people organizing around their whiteness has never turned out well for Black people. That's just like, that's it's I haven't seen it work. So, and it doesn't normally result in something that that's great for us. And if the model is such that it's one that doesn't necessarily recognize the divine in the other, but it just recognizes like, you're really messed up, and you're messed up. You can't help it because you're white. So now let me help you realize just how messed up you are in your whiteness. And once I beat you down, then I can lift you up, and then you can join us in our work to liberate Black people. Okay, so I can't trust that. It's like, so where are the Black people in this? Well, the Black people who we trust are the Black people who tell us that what we're doing is fine, that what we do, we need an army of anti-racist people who can lead white folks into the promised land. And it's just that, like, when they get there, I'm not sure what our place will be, because I don't think that that's how you come into true community with folk. And so I worry about whether or not that, as much as it concerns me, and as much as I feel that it marginalizes and really kind of others Black people, I also think about how these are my brothers and sisters, and maybe this is what they need right now. And they're not really concerned about what Black people need, but there's real concern about, like, what do we need to do right in the world, right? Like, how can we, and it sounds like this is from the outsider, because I can only be an outsider to this, but it's like being in the Religious Society of Friends right now, it's like, it's not about me right now. It's not about Black people at all. It's really about white people, and white people figuring out what they should do, which is very different than when I came into the Religious Society of Friends. It was, even though it was predominantly white, I did not get the impression that the work was about white people and for white people, right? And so it was a overwhelmingly white environment, but it was not a white environment that was attempting to center its whiteness so they could understand itself as a white entity and figure out what to do in the world. And
Mhm.
I'm not saying that's not good work, but it's certainly not my work.
Mhm.
And when you're in the midst of that, it's like, so what of this work is about like my spiritual growth or my spiritual nurture, or what is the message for me? Because there's nothing about this that will lead to someone um, participating in my growth. God forbid, someone trying to hold me accountable, because that's just definitely, that can't be done, right? Or someone, challenging me in any way. It's like, this is not for you, right?
Mm.
And so, AFSC just, they just sent out, they're having a workshop that's for white people of faith to work on there. And inadvertently, well, it's not inadvertently, I got an invitation, and some other folks got, some other Black folks. So we were supposed to, realize that this is not for us, but just the process of that you get something that, well, this is this is being done for you, because it started off by talking about Black liberation. And so to participate in Black liberation, this is what we're going to do. Okay. And so we all are going to get together. And at the point in which we're together in that room, deciding how to participate in Black liberation, there's not going to be a Black person in the room, right?
Mhm.
And so when you come up with the best you can do, I'm not sure that you still are not operating, such that the blind is not leading the blind in some way, right?
Mhm.
And so, I just wonder. I mean, I just feel like maybe friends are supposed to wander in the wilderness for a while, but I don't know what that means for me. Like,
Mm.
what am I supposed to be doing? Because I want to grow, and I want to be in a spiritual community that um, is working with me, not about me, not trying to
Mhm.
figure out the Negro problem, but I want to be a part of that. Um, yeah, and this is a story I want to share because it still lingers with me. When Phil and I went to Durham to visit my daughter Nia, who was a real Quaker,
Mm.
and so we went to Durham meeting, and while we were there, someone got up to minister, and he talked about, he was a white male, and he talked about um, trying to heal the world, and that was part of the Quaker tradition, which then set somebody else off, and that person rose and actually called him by name,
Mm.
and like just called him out, and said that what he said was racist and so on and so forth. Now it happened that not only was Phil and I visiting, but my daughter, my daughter's partner, her mother was visiting as well. So they had invited, so we're going to invite some Black people to this meeting, and my daughter's showing off her meeting, and, wanted her partner's, mom to be there too. And I remember her mother saying that there wasn't anything about it that was like worship.
Mm.
Like this was her first Quaker experience. And I had never heard that. Like sometimes people don't know what's going on, but not that there wasn't anything about it that felt like worship. And she felt like, well, were they doing that like for us? Like it almost felt like, well, they putting on performance. Like what?
Mm.
Like why wasn't this like just going to church and worshiping God,
Mm.
and and share, like why was this like the entire conversation as different people got up to take each other on. And this was meaningful worship. And
Mhm.
she said, I'm I'm never going to this again,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And my daughter and her partner said, maybe we need to start visiting some churches.
Hmm.
And that was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
That was heartbreaking because she loves worship and she loves Quakerism, but she's like week after week to go somewhere where, white people are taking each other on about you, around you, but there's not any ministry that nurtures you because it's not about you.
Hmm.
And you almost feel like you're imposing on someone's therapy session, and that you
Mhm.
really like you're embarrassed to be there. And so you need to find somewhere where you might actually hear a message that might challenge you to to grow yourself, right? Or to humble yourself, or to not a message like, yeah, get them, but like saying like, no, I got to get under the weight of this. There's so little of that left.
Hmm.
Um, and that makes me sad. And it's why Ujima has become so special for me, because it's really where we worship,
Hmm.
and we can talk about oppression and race and racism, but mostly it's not about white people,
Mhm.
and it's not even about our Africanity. Like, it can just some days just be about what it means to experience the presence of the Spirit. And are we doing the things we need to do in order to walk and live and breathe in that? Like, you know, remember when messages used to,
Right.
to be kind of like, like that,
Hmm.
and you go home and say, wow, I need to pray more. I need to love more. I need to, you
Hmm.
know,
Mhm.
and that's what attracted me to Quakerism. Not
Hmm.
that white folks had gotten over racism. I know better,
Mhm.
right? But it's not that. It wasn't like, oh, these are good white people. No, it was like, they might be messed up and I might be messed up, but there's something in this where I think they're trying to find their way, and so am I.
Hmm.
I think God is in this.
Hmm.
Like, I think God is busy in this.
Hmm.
And and that there are moments that God is able to move in spite of their whiteness, in
Hmm.
spite of, my pain, in spite of my being, whatever, in spite of my, you know, being American, in spite of my being straight, in spite of whatever barriers that can be there that can cause you to be a part of a group of oppressors. Just that belief that somehow or another the spirit can actually sometimes even break through that.
Mhm.
That's what was like miraculous to me. And that's what I feel like we're losing faith in.
Hmm.
Like, there's that song, just as I am.
Hmm.
Not that we gotta all get fixed first,
Mhm.
but like to be able to be before God and to be before one another,
Mhm.
broken.
Mhm.
Just this is where I am, right? This doesn't mean this is where I want to be always, but this is where I am. And that somehow or another, even in the state that we're in, that we could catch glimpses of God in each other,
Mhm.
just glimpses, right? And I feel like this path is not one where we're looking for glimpses of
Mhm.
God anymore. And I know that as we we feel like we're witnessing kind of growing uh, friends that look more like me than you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I still can't picture what it would be like for those friends to come into the yearly meeting, not because it's white, but because of kind of how this racial justice work is rolling out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that there's still not enough discussion about the work that needs to be done. Like, what I felt like Spirit really put on my heart was our work is our witness. It's
Mm-hmm.
our work. It's not that we always get things right and we always say the right things. But I feel like they're just some, they're concrete things that if we were really, I hate to say it this way, but if we were really serious about it, there'd be some things we'd be working on that's different. Like we'd be willing to wrestle. Like I feel, you know, I, white people having non-racist attitudes, it's just not, that just isn't that critical for me, but I know it might be for them in terms of their salvation. But then Quakers not having schools for Black children, that's concrete. Like
Mm-hmm.
no matter how you, like where you are in your white consciousness journey, at the end of the day, right, when we can have friends schools that poor children can't go to, and that our witness in education continues to be education for those privileged, and the Mennonites can open a school and that's not tuition bearing or that's scholarship bearing, and the Lutherans can open a school, right, but Quakers can't open a school in North Philadelphia, and that's not the kind of thing that's being talked about,
Mm-hmm.
right? The kinds of things that are being talked about is, and this anti-racist, how do you see the world stuff, as opposed to there are concrete things
Mm-hmm.
that it would seem if we're trying to disrupt a system that we would do to disrupt that system,
Mm-hmm.
right? And saying that, well, we have actually built institutions that perpetuate certain systems, right? So we're perpetuating a certain kind of class elitism with some of the systems that we built, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the work of like, oh, how do we dismantle that? Like, or how do we, and that's not so much about like, how do we make each other feel guilty about, I care less about whether people end up feeling guilty or any of that. If there were a group of conservative evangelical friends that say, you know what, we need to have a Quaker school in West Philly, I'm down with that. Like, I let them work out their personal racism, as they do. But to at least say there's some work that we need to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, think concrete things like that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, for me, like, I see how people, have been really individually generous in terms of Ujima. But that's still not like the yearly meeting or some Quaker entity saying, you know what, there should be a building. These people shouldn't be paying rent. There should be, like, you
Mm-hmm.
start talking about reparations. Okay, can we
Mm-hmm.
just start with the fact that we all are in these buildings that our ancestors left us and that some of their ancestors built? Like, the least we can do, let's get some land and a building and let those folks do what they do,
Mm-hmm.
right? We don't have to control them. We don't have to like, we gotta get them a consultant. You know what? Let them do what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And not, well, but I don't know if they can run it. So what? Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll burn it down. But you know what? That's really not your business. Like, why are you that worried about that? Right? That for me, that's the work. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't have, like, I know that there are Black folks who are called to labor with white people about how they're feeling, but I'm, that's, That's not my calling. My calling has been to work amongst Black folk, um, but around issues of education and housing and healthcare, and like how do we disrupt these systems by even building like models, and before we disrupt it externally, like what do we have internally that we need to disrupt, and do we have like the faith to just take baby steps? To me, a Quaker school, with like 50, 100 children, that is different than what's existed, is like this wonderful radical baby step.
Mm-hmm.
The let's make sure that Black Quakers have, some land and, a building. And yeah, let's not, because, they shouldn't have to ask for it. It shouldn't be that. It should be, oh, okay, this just makes sense,
Mm-hmm.
right? But for me, that's the work. And that's not what we're talking about. And so it reminds me of the story of the rich young ruler. And that's what I feel. I feel like there are all of these really sincere people who are saying, kind of, what must I do to be saved? But then when they really hear, they turn, they're sad because they can't really give up the
Mm-hmm.
thing that is required for them to be able to begin to do the work, right? And so I feel like some of this other stuff is just distraction from, no, right? If I really am saying, Lord, what can I do? And when Jesus says, give everything you have to the poor and
Mm-hmm.
follow me. And he
Mm-hmm.
said, you know what? I can't. I just can't. I can't. Right. And he walks away sadly.
Mm-hmm.
And he probably then goes and starts a different movement,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like Christians, I can't do what Jesus said, so I'm just going to create some jazzy alternative, and I'm going to call it Christianity, and we're gonna have a whole prosperity gospel thing going, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, and we're going to create new laws about who people should sleep with and all that. We're going to do all
Mm-hmm.
that. We're going to do anything but what Jesus actually taught, because it's too hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just love your enemy and turn the other cheek. And like, it's like, okay, who's going to do that? No, we're going to create something else and we're going to call it that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we're doing some of that same thing around this racial work, that we have a sense of some of what we need to do, but it's too hard. And
Mm-hmm.
so instead, this is what we do. And if that's what we're going to do, I mean, I want to be able to ride. I want to be able, because this is my community. I mean, I haven't figured it out why. Why someone who is, very much Pan-Africanist, just excited about her Africanity. Like, why? I ended up in Quakerism, other than the thrill of being amongst the people with a dynamic God that was still talking to them. Like I felt God was still talking to me, having this post-revelation conversation that went beyond the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And that was exciting to me. And it still is. Um, and I I know that God is capable of leading us into, radical living of our faith, um, and radical loving of one another, like really radical, like to really take seriously that by this shall they know that you're my disciples, is
Mm-hmm.
that you love one another.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the way you love, like that nobody loved like y'all,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's that's the work.
Mm-hmm.
And I just I just pray to find my way in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So that's what I'm thinking.
Well, amen. Thank you for that, for your ministry, because I feel like you are an elder to me and in the community, and um, the call to focus on the concrete actions and stop navel gazing and get into it. Um, white people can have their space to not burden people of color with their white peopling, but that's not enough. That's way not enough. And sometimes it can distract us and center whiteness in a way that blinds us from what's really needed, um, and makes Black people feel like they're not part of the conversation and like they don't belong. And that's a message and a call that I think we all need to hear. So I appreciate your ministry.
I think that the role, so what I feel like, what's been hard is that even when we belong, it feels like it's as the accuser, like
Mm,
that's our function.
mm,
It's like we're gonna beat we're gonna beat each other up, and we invite you to help us. Like
mm,
that's really the only role you have is to help us to be to feel guilty.
mm-hmm,
Um, and at that point, I just don't. As hard as it is for us to be brothers and sisters, it's worth it. It's to me that's the word, right? And so like I think that one of the things that I appreciate about you, I mean, you have this um, profound spiritual centeredness.
mm,
And I just, so the attraction is spiritual. It's not like, oh, I just, he got good politics and, because I don't know what those things are.
mm-hmm,
But I believe that the common ground that we can meet on is this ground of spirit. And and in that, then I feel that there's the opportunity for a kind of mutuality, right? That doesn't exist in the these paradigms that where the roles are you're an ally or you're going to practice followership or accompaniment. Like that makes me want to be violent.
So maybe you don't want to
Say,
be my elder. Is that what you're saying?
and like it really does. Like I have to like really talk to myself. Like I really don't need to have a gun because that like I wish you would come up in here trying to accompany me somewhere. Like don't please don't. I really 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 struggle when when people use ally language, when folks want to do something like for me or stand with me. Like it's not
Mm,
as opposed to just this sense that you and I deeply care about justice.
yeah.
And we are on this battlefield together,
Mm-hmm,
right? And we are risking ourselves and our lives because we both believe something so deeply and so profoundly, and we've been moved by the spirit. But that's different, and I need you, and you need me, and like we really are. That there's this mutuality,
mm-hmm,
and that's what's missing, and that's what's different than you know the movement in the 60s and 70s, even
Mm,
those spaces where there were Black and white people together, even places like the Panther Party, it wasn't this notion of I'm going to use, my exalted privilege in order to help you get free. Okay, first, apparently you're assuming that you are free. So let me help you first with that. Like, okay, so you're not free and I'm not free, and you're not working on Black liberation. So stop saying that,
mhm,
right? Maybe what we're working on, you might be working on human actualization. Like you want to grow yourself so that you can walk this earth being fully human,
mhm,
like that you really want to get rid of some of your own savagery. But what you're not working on, you're not working on my liberation. So please do not
mhm,
say that, right? So it's
yeah.
like aren't we working on our liberation? Like I want to be free, you want to be free, and what do we really want to be free to do? Whether
Mm,
you check Malcolm or Fannie Lou or Ella Baker at Dr. King, at the end of the day, what do we really want to be free to do? Is to be human
mm,
and to have our humanity recognized. That's
mhm,
what we ultimately want to do,
mhm,
right? And so this is not about, white people are already free and they got it together but the only thing they don't have together is that they have oppressed other folk. And so now they need to help liberate those people. And it's like, no, you've been debased. You've been like, you've lost track of your humanity. And like, we on this path trying to be free, all of us,
mhm,
right? And we working on our liberation. That's what we're doing. And and we have these different histories and these different positionalities in this. And those positionalities shift depending on what aspect of identity we're talking about,
mhm,
right? Because just having a daughter who is a lesbian, I just like, it was a journey. It
mhm.
wasn't like I was all with it. It was like, okay, you sure? I was like, are you okay? Or just like hurtful things, there just was, it took a while and it took a lot for me to put some things together. And I did have like a power over that could make things really difficult for her, and not just because she was my daughter, um, but because the world perceived of her differently
Mhm,
than me. And so I could occupy spaces and do some things that she could not do openly.
mhm,
And so I got to work on that. And that
mm,
was that was a good thing for me to have to work on that. And so it depends on what aspect of identity we're even talking about, whether we get to be the oppressor or whether we get to be the oppressed, right? And so if we can model what that work looks like, but
mhm,
always with this end goal in mind of us freeing ourselves so that we can be fully human, which means that by so doing, like we really like actualize our divinity. To be fully human is to be divine,
mhm.
right? And so I don't know. I thought that was the Quaker work. And I don't know. I just hope God will show me my part,
Mhm.
and I'll be faithful in doing it. I hope.
I think it is. I think it is. But it's clear that um, the work of liberation is mine as well as yours.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
Well, we could probably keep talking for for more time, but I definitely want to uh, close this and but leave open what comes next as from a place of feeling both like um, the work is shared, and
Mm,
also like my ancestors are really calling me um, to
mm,
take on the responsibility that I have on
mm,
their behalf of
mm.
healing this earth, or doing whatever I can to help
Wow.
that healing. Um, the message
Mm,
that comes from me, all from them, is just get on with it, just do it.
mm,
So
mm,
whatever it has to look
mm,
like, you know.
mm,
And I hope that it can be grounded in, well, I know that it will be grounded in the Quaker faith for sure.
mm, mm.
Whether it will be grounded in the institutions,
An
that,
institution.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
is another
Mm-hmm.
question. But
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Mm. Yeah. Why might it be grounded in the faith and not the institution?
hmm.
You know, one of the things that I don't know that we've created this safe space to talk about or think about or pray about is this. There's a way that I think we're questioning whether the institution itself is oppressive, or whether the institution, like whether what has to happen is that the institution has to be dismantled so that the faith can flourish. And
Hmm.
so I feel like, and I wonder about that. I can't say that that's what I believe. Um, but I think that there is some sense of that, that, you know, Quakerism really just kind of has to blow itself up. Like,
Hmm.
dismantle. Like, we
Mhm.
need to dismantle this thing and build it anew. And I I would love to be in a space where I could hear people who think that and feel that. I could hear from them more,
Hmm.
and also hear from people who see the institution as kind of the embodiment of the faith, such that I could just better discern, like, what is it that we have to hold on to? Like,
Mhm.
you know, if we were going to blow something up, like, what's the bathwater and what's the baby? What's like the at the point in which we let this go,
Mhm.
that we've just lost something so precious.
Mhm.
Um, but there may be other things that we really can renegotiate. You know, someone just asked something about Ujima and membership, and you know, and I know Amy and I have talked about it, but every time I try to think about it, like membership as a meeting, I can't get very far, because I know that it there's not. So at first I was like, okay, so how can we position Ujima to perhaps be a meeting, and does that make sense? And what I realized is that it's not. It, there's not a positioning of Ujima. It's like something would have to change within the Religious Society of Friends, because Ujima simply doesn't fit in any of the ways that an entity could be a meeting. You know,
Mhm.
like, folks would have to be comfortable with dual membership. Folks would have to be comfortable with people belonging who are not even in the yearly meeting. So
Mhm.
there isn't a yearly meeting for it to be under. even though most of us live geographically in Philadelphia. So it would have to mean that the religious society of Friends was willing to shift in some ways, or to at least say, oh, well, yeah, membership is really important, but the way it's structured, these people couldn't be members. So is that okay? Okay,
Hmm.
so what would we have to do
Mhm.
to, because that doesn't feel okay. Okay, so what would need to change such that when it changed, we still were Quakers,
Mhm.
but but we changed some structurally. Like the structure actually changed, right? Because it it made sense that in order for us to spiritually be who we needed to be, we had to change this thing about how we are built,
Mm.
right? And to be able to have those are the kinds of awarenesses that's like, Dad, okay, we might have to do A in order to get to B or C.
Mm.
Um, and so, how do we have those kind of conversations, which are not abstract? It's not like this abstract, like, how do we build, what's the new structure for the meeting? Let's try this new structure. Like, why are we even doing it?
Mhm.
As opposed to like really responding to what's in our present experience,
Mhm. Mm.
right?
Mhm.
So like we miss certain opportunities because we're not responding to what's in our present experience.
Mm. Mhm.
Um, and so I mean I feel like this thing about Ujima really raises the issue of Quaker membership and what is it, and
Yeah.
how do you belong, and like what are monthly meetings, and what, like, it's not like being a Baptist. You can be a Baptist and not belong to a church,
Mhm.
but you can't be a Quaker without belonging to a meeting. And that might be good because there's some spiritual accountability there. But so there are all kinds of opportunities I think that we may be missing
Mhm.
by being willing to be present with one another, and present in our times. And so like what's happening in terms of the police, for us to be present with that as Quakers and be able to think about what's our part,
Mhm.
that is our part because we're Quakers.
Mm.
Because there's a part that's like this because I'm Ayeshah, or because it's Sankofa, like, but there's a role there that really comes from my being a friend.
Mhm.
And so what is our part? What can we bring to the party
Mhm.
because we are friends? And
Mm.
I think we that there is something for us to offer as we talk about how can policing change in the community, and to the extent that we've contributed both positively and negatively to a criminal justice system as friends,
Mhm.
then it would seem that we would be trying to figure out how can we as friends um, bear witness today with
Mhm.
our work, not just with our ideology.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I really love you, Zach. You just, oh my gosh, you're
No,
just so beautiful.
me too. This has been a great opportunity. I feel like um, when, yeah, regardless of what the fact that this is for a thing, I think I've enjoyed talking with you a lot. So thank you.
Well, thank you for being present, and you have a wonderful way of being present. And it reminds me of how in worship, um, it appears that it can appear as if we're being passive, right? And the action is with whoever is speaking. But if you go beyond or underneath that, like you really feel the spiritual activity,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's what happens with you. Like, even when you're not speaking, it's like, no, I'm like awake and like I am spiritually active. Like, I'm not just present, like I am spiritually active. And wow, I mean, it's really a gift and you model it. I just wonder how to teach it.
Hmm.
Because like, um, I have this whole thing, could have a whole nother session on clerking. I feel like until we, I think that we will continue to be unclerkable. I think we're I just think,
It doesn't matter
I
who
just,
we choose, right?
no, like that, it's just, I think we're just not clerkable. I think we're lawless. And I don't think
Mm.
um, that there's it takes this whole little spiritual process, this business with the, worship with attention to business,
Mm-hmm.
it takes so much trust.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
if you enter it with suspicions about different people's, political agendas, and you enter it with your own, doesn't work. And
Right.
so now we're like different ones of us. We're trying to win an argument, and
Mm-hmm.
so and then we want the clerk to be able to manage us. It's like children in the classroom.
Yeah.
It's like they will wreak havoc in your class and then they will talk about you. If you
Mm-hmm.
come and you sub, they will turn your class upside down. And then they'll say, I don't like that teacher because they can't control us. I hate when teachers say, right?
Oh,
And
boy.
we do that with the clerk. But I feel like there is a way that we're all supposed to be clerking together.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not the person up front, but I'm like actively trying to discern the movement of the spirit in the collective, in the body, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I'm trying to discern what God is doing amongst us,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that takes spiritual activity.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we know that. I don't know that we know how to do that. I don't know that we even know that we're supposed to do it. But like right now, it's like we rate the clerk. We rate how well they've done
Right.
in particular. It's like they should just give us signs with numbers on it. Just hold it up so we can just like, this is what we're doing. So yeah, but it's not,
That's
when the meeting gets real crazy, like I ask myself, what am I supposed to be doing right now? And sometimes I felt like I failed,
mm,
to really be responsible, you
mm-hmm.
know, um, during that time, to do something other than to feel uncomfortable or cringe or be upset, but or to just pray about it, like, oh my God, this is a mess.
Mm-hmm.
But that there's something else that we're supposed to do. And I think that if we select a new clerk, we've got to, like, we should go through a series of like worships or training on what it means for us to be communally responsible for the worship, and and we need to make sure that the clerk not only has training, but that they should be required to have like a support group
Yeah.
that they, you know, but we should have a better sense of what our role is,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so you have a gift, and you've done some work along the way, I think, to cultivate that gift. And I'm hoping that the spirit will help us to tap into that, or figure out how we can grow some of that. I want more of that. Like, I want more of you, right?
Mm.
In me.
Mm.
And I just, I just would like us to think about how to lift up this thing that you do.
Mm.
You know? Yeah.